106 miles to Chicago. We got a full tank of gas, half a pack of cigarettes. It's dark, and we're wearing sunglasses. Hit it.
This talk is all about guide running. If you want to know a bit more about the process of getting the initial data, there's a separate video for that. This video only really aims to show off what was found. Right, quick introduction. This is a running track. The guy on the right is visually impaired and is being guided around a track by holding onto a person on his left using a piece of rope, and that is guide running. Good, we've got that over and done with. Last year, I invented a fancy way of observing running pairs, involving basic motion capture to track guide running pairs around a running track, and the method was a bit of a car crash. But now, after a year of hitting the results with a hammer, none of it worked. There was no clear indication from this that they tracked better using one method versus another, which implied our science was wrong. So what happens when your data doesn't play ball? You hit it with a bigger stick. So rather than focusing on the numbers generated by the motion capture itself, we started looking directly at the video footage. Turns out if you're unfamiliar with the method, you tend to try and hold on tighter. So when they're either running with the guide on the wrong side or didn't receive any audio feedback, they were physically running differently. By listening into their conversations before they even ran, it gave vital clues of this. But if you're more relaxed, you tend to be a lot looser with your guide. That, tied into the fact they only did each run once, does explain why examining motion capture in isolation was a bad idea. So it's obvious that guide running isn't as clear-cut as predicted, and not all of it is about tactile feedback. It would seem a lot of it is verbal as well. So what happens when you examine the verbal language of guide running? To do this required a fancy workaround. So, cue the music. Write the footage on Premiere Pro and transcribe it all into Excel with its timestamps. Write a handy script that reads the timestamps and put it all into relevant points in motion capture data. Print out those charts over 3A3 pages and print those pages and stick them together. Get a rule to map out all the instances when they talked. Color code everything that they said so patterns can be identified. Repeat this about 30 times until you lay out all your work until it's stretched from one side of the office to the other for an impressive photo shoot. So let's see what the data brought in. It took a while, but it was doable and very informative. When nearing a change in direction, such as a bend, the guide naturally gives instruction, but it's also layered with landmark cues.
Right side. So we're coming to the bend, because of the light.
And they also pepper landmark cues where possible during long straights or bends to indicate progress.
Okay, halfway down.
In fact, there's a lot happening when the guide seemingly has nothing to do, such as on a long clean straight. They can be giving coaching advice, pacing advice, reassurance, giving updates on landmarks, or having conversations, or building up delivery for warnings. This is almost on a constant updating list of things to do when guiding. All this is technically optional, but peppering these things clearly makes it a more comfortable experience and helps the runner develop. But here is the point that isn't mentioned in the literature, or at least not explicitly, and that is the role of reassurance. Reassurance is a pattern of saying well done or good or generally giving praise. When guides are giving instructions, they repeat the instruction until it's followed and then give praise and reassurance.
Right, so we're going to start to go around the top corner now, mate. Just stay nice and into me. That's it, lovely. Lovely, lovely, lovely.
Praise works as a way of bookending an instruction. When guided verbally without a bookend, the runner can only presume that they need to continue altering their course. When runners are sustaining a trajectory, the guide still gives praise, so they know they're still on course.
We're staying beautifully in lane. We are, yeah. We are indeed.
Conversations are arguably a form of reassurance, as there's an unwritten rule that when the pair are talking, everything is going well. When entering a turn, the guide tries to give warning and tells the runner when to execute it, and they do it pretty well, but sometimes they mess up.
Around again to the left. Just come to me. That's it.
But why do they mess up? Well, turns out we need another method. In ergonomics, there are many ways to examine errors and how to reduce it. In this case, we're using a tool called Tracer Light Retro. Now, to make this work, you have to do the following. Look at the motion capture data and the footage to identify when the runners are veering off. Record each incident and try and identify why they are veering. Then categorize each of these errors on the fancy table and then look at your data and come to some conclusion. And the conclusion is communication error.
I should.
Well, you told me the guy's names on the baseball
I
team.
say, who's on first? What's on second? I don't know who's on third.
You ain't saying nothing to me yet. Go ahead and tell me. Who's on first?
Yes.
I mean the guy's name.
Who?
The guy playing first.
Who?
The guy playing first base.
Who?
The guy on first base.
Who is on first?
What are you asking me for? I don't know.
So let's revisit the footage where, for seemingly no reason, the runner veers drastically to the left. If you look, they enter the bend, but the guide forgets to say so. So later, when he says, "Okay, we are just curving around again to the left,"
Okay, then we're just curving around again to the left.
he said it as a landmark cue and not as an instruction, except she thinks it is an instruction that needs to be acted on, and veers more than needed. There is also other communication errors, and this all adds up.
12 o'clock on the clock face. 12 o'clock, 12 o'clock. Touch left, 12 o'clock on the clock face.
Where is 12 o'clock? As far as the person who can't see, 12 o'clock is where he's running towards, so he's running fine. It's only when he says turn left or come to me does he react the correct way. So, as a guide, we need to be careful about how you tell your runner something, but in reality, when assessing all these errors, they are minor, because the guide can easily correct. In fact, all the runners completed the task without a hitch. So, do whatever works for you, but please bear that in mind. But wait, there's more data to shake out of this study. You see, before asking the runners to perform those 5 tasks, we asked them to perform something called a NASA TLX. Now, a NASA TLX is a mental workload questionnaire developed by NASA, and it's normally done after a task. However, I thought it'd be fun to do it before the task to see if their predictions matched with reality. So NASA TLX asks you to measure a few things: mental workload, physical exertion, reaction time, and ask you to rank it on a scale of 1 to 100 and mark it on a page. Obviously, asking the visually impaired population to mark things on the page is a bit ridiculous, so we asked them to rank it 1 to 10 and record it verbally.
Good morning, Vietnam! Hey, this is not
And
a
the
test.
results were fascinating. Overall, the visually impaired population predicted the following. Having a guide on the wrong side would be a little bit more difficult. Being guided with the guide being silent is doable, and being guided with only vocal cues would be horrendous. The logic here seems to be that the tether acts almost like a safety net, and so long as that's in place, everything else will be fine. But after completing the task, their opinions changed a bit. Guidance with a silent guide felt terrible and disorientating, as they couldn't tell where they are or how well they were doing. They also found audio-only guidance was better than predicted. The guide could give a rich amount of information and also deliver that reassurance, so it made it a lot better than they initially predicted. But still, using verbal and tactile together is still the king. Most likely because it has a built-in redundancy. So if one feedback loop is distorted or damaged, the other one can assist and take over. So the first takeaway is that irrespective which way you run around a track, having the guide on the inside lane or outside lane isn't as important as your personal hand preference. Now, in a previous study, a professional sprinter said that they want the guide on the inside lane as it leads to better lane hugging. But for the average runner, sticking with general preference seems to be the best way forward and is far better. The other takeaway is this: runners who lost their sight suddenly later on in life actually gained the most benefit from audio-only guidance. Even though they previously thought it was going to be the worst possible run, they actually enjoyed it the most. In fact, if you don't believe me, here's an audio directly from their run.
God, I'm not happy I'm crying. I can't believe it.
You're absolutely
God, I'm
fine.
free. I feel I'm free. I can't believe this.
You did absolutely perfect.
2 subgroups accurately predicted how hard or easy a task would be. The first lot were those who lost their sight very early in life. obviously because they have spent years to appreciate and understand their own abilities. The second batch were people who were partially sighted and were running in conditions that allowed them to see. Many of those who ran were using their limited sight to focus on the painted lines of the tracks to stay in lane. Naturally, for those with tunnel vision, it meant they were actually straddling 2 lanes. But it also meant they got lost when the lanes were either faded or crossing over other lane markings. One way to resolve this is actually painting the lanes themselves differently. Some running tracks already do this for aesthetic reasons, rather than that for vision impairment, but in doing so it could lead to better accessibility for a partially sighted runner. All this information does paint a picture of what guides should be doing. They should be using tactile and audio together to deliver the best experience. And it may be worth visiting a running track and trying out audio-only guidance, as it seems a lot easier than many predicted. All this research does place an awkward spotlight on the research community. Our first scientific observations about how horses gallop was done by Edward Maybridge in 1878. It has officially taken us 141 years for the scientific community to move from horses galloping to guide running. Studying guide running in retrospect seems like a no-brainer, but what took us so long to look into it? The research has shown the complex role a human guide has in guide running, and we've only scratched the surface. But developing an independent running tool for the blind and partially sighted population is a worthwhile cause, as there's a desire for it and it could break some barriers into entering and sustaining sports. Knowing that it's only now we have this data, it does bring into question how current tech developers are designing their tools to allow people to run. Some exist today and are under development, using tactile belts and straps to navigate people, while others ask you to follow a sound while wearing headphones. So what design specifications or research are they developing from? Our team, I'd like to think, are developing tech in an appropriate way. A while ago we developed the running line, which is a relatively low-tech approach attempting to allow a vision-impaired child to run independently between 2 points via use of a suspended rope. It was actually the springboard for this PhD. This was developed from observation of thousands of participants and listening to what their users were saying. Improvements were not always hardware tweaks, but done with coaching adaptations and working out how those coaching changes could later on be translated into design changes. It just seems concerning these running products seem tech-led. Which isn't inherently bad, but should be done with caution, as the product could indeed function, but an unpleasant experience would more likely turn away people from sports. Walking products are not immune from this either, as while there is some research on how the blind and partially sighted navigate, the foundations are pretty weak. And yet we see thousands of products, all claiming to be the next big thing to help blind people navigate, from sonic canes, vibrating shirts, and robotic guide dogs. Yes, robotic guide dogs is apparently a thing. But then again, so are guide ponies. Guide ponies look amazing. I'm just saying, guide ponies. So where is this research heading towards next? Well, the aim is to test those verbal rules that was found in this study by delivering them via a simple headset that does not obstruct the ears and see if a digital voice can emulate audio-only guidance.
Slightly right. Right.
If it can, then we know the rules that we developed are functional and should be adapted by guide runners and tech aficionados alike. If it proves to be too difficult, then by studying what went wrong, it can help understand where to go next for another researcher to take the baton forward. Now, I appreciate that I went through a lot of data all at once, and I know it's been a bit dense. Yet I hid away a lot of the science behind it, and a lot of the data actually. But I wanted to just give you a taster of what work has been done and what has been found. If you want to know any section in more detail, or you have any other questions, you can either wait for the PhD to be published, or if you're super interested, contact me directly. My name is Victor Jagannathan from the Design School at Loughborough University, and this is How on Earth Do We Guide Run.